Picture Britain in the 1970s. The roads were filled with boxy, upright saloons and traditional family cars that all looked remarkably similar: square edges, flat panels, simple lines, and designs that felt safe and familiar. Most cars on British streets blended into the background. They were practical, they were ordinary, and they looked exactly like you'd expect a car from that decade to look. But then, every so often, something completely different appeared. Something that didn't fit. Something that made people stop walking, turn around, and stare in disbelief. A car that looked like it had arrived from 30 years in the future, sitting quietly on a road surrounded by vehicles that belonged to a completely different era. Today on Britain Rewind, we're counting down 10 British cars that looked futuristic in the 1970s, designs so advanced, they barely seemed real. And the car at number 1 didn't just stand out, it looked like it came from a different world entirely. Now let's start the countdown. Number 10. Bond Bug. At a time when most small British cars were boxy, practical little boxes designed purely for getting from A to B, the Bond Bug arrived looking like something a child had drawn while imagining the year 2000. It was a three-wheeled, wedge-shaped, bright orange machine that sat so low to the ground it almost seemed to hover. There were no conventional doors, instead, the entire top canopy tilted forward and you climbed in from the front. Nothing else on British roads looked remotely like this. People didn't just notice it, they laughed, they pointed, they walked over to look closer. It felt playful and radical at the same time. The Bond Bug wasn't trying to be serious. But in doing so, it accidentally looked more futuristic than almost everything around it. This didn't feel like a 1970s car, it felt like a peek into a strange and exciting tomorrow. But the next car pushed that idea of forward thinking even further. Number 9. Reliant Simmit GTE. When the Reliant Simmit GTE was cruising through Britain in the early 1970s, it was doing something almost no other car had thought to do, combining the sleek, low profile of a sports car with the practicality of an estate. That combination sounds simple today, but back then it was genuinely revolutionary. Other cars were either sporty or practical, never elegantly both. The Scimitar GTE had a long, low roofline that swept gracefully into a rear tailgate, giving it a silhouette that felt decades ahead of its era. Princess and famously owned several of them, which told you everything about its reputation. People who saw it parked on the street often assumed it was something foreign and exotic, not a product of a relatively small British manufacturer. This didn't feel like a car from the 1970s, it felt like a blueprint for sports cars that wouldn't exist for another 20 years. But the next car on our list had an even more dramatic presence on the road. Number 8. Triumph TR7. When Triumph launched the TR7 in 1975, the motoring press called it the shape of things to come, and that slogan wasn't just marketing. It actually meant something when you saw this car in person. While other British sports cars were still using rounded, traditional curves, the TR7 arrived with a sharp, angular wedge shape that looked aggressive and thoroughly modern. The low nose, rising roofline, and distinctive diagonal body crease running along the side made it look unlike anything else on British roads at the time. Younger buyers saw it parked outside a showroom and felt an immediate surge of excitement. This looked fast, sharp, and new. It divided opinion, certainly, but division is exactly what happens when something genuinely challenges the norm. This didn't feel like a car from the 1970s, it felt like a statement about where design was heading. But the next car made an even bolder statement without saying a single word. Number 7. AC3000ME. The AC3000ME was one of those cars that made you do a genuine double-take when it appeared on the road. Built by the legendary British manufacturer AC Cars, this mid-engine sports car had a low, wide stance and a smooth, aerodynamic body shape that felt genuinely exotic. At a time when even performance cars often looked quite upright and traditional, the 3000ME sat close to the ground with a wide front end, clean panel surfaces, and a profile that resembled something you might expect from an Italian manufacturer rather than a British one. It was rare, it was striking, and it looked like it belonged on a racing circuit rather than a British high street. People who spotted one on the road often had no idea what they were looking at, and that mystery made it feel even more futuristic. This didn't feel like a car from the 1970s, it felt like a limited edition vision of the future. But the next car wasn't limited at all, and it changed how Britain thought about everyday driving. Number 6. Range Rover. When the original Range Rover arrived in 1970, people genuinely didn't know what to make of it. It was tall, it was boxy in the best possible way, and it sat high above every other vehicle on the road with a commanding, almost architectural presence. But what made it feel futuristic wasn't just its height, it was the combination of genuine luxury and serious off-road capability, wrapped in a clean, purposeful design that looked nothing like the muddy farm vehicles people expected. The interior was another world, wide, airy, and thoughtfully designed at a time when most cars felt cramped and utilitarian. Farmers looked at it. Aristocrats looked at it. City professionals looked at it. Nobody could quite categorize it, and that confusion was its greatest achievement. This didn't feel like a car from the 1970s, it felt like it had invented an entirely new category that the rest of the world would spend the next 50 years trying to copy. But the next car didn't need 50 years, it turned heads the moment it appeared. Number 5. TVR Taimar. TVR has always made cars that feel slightly dangerous, slightly raw, and completely unlike anything else, and the Taimar, introduced in 1976, was no exception. What set the Taimar apart visually was its long, wide, almost predatory body, wrapped tightly around the mechanical components beneath with very little wasted space. It had pop-up headlights, a hatchback rear opening that was genuinely innovative for a sports car of this type, and a low-slung profile that made it look permanently ready to launch forward. In the context of mid-1970s British roads, this car looked alien. It was hand-built in Blackpool, which made its exotic appearance even more surprising. Nobody expected something this dramatic to emerge from a small workshop in the north of England. This didn't feel like a car from the 1970s, it felt like a handcrafted piece of the future. But the next car brought that futuristic feeling to an entirely different class of driver. Number 4. Rover SD1. The Rover SD1 was a genuinely shocking car to encounter in 1976, not because it was extreme, but because it was so unexpectedly stylish for a large British family saloon. At the time, most executive cars in Britain were long, heavy, and conservatively styled, designed to communicate respectability rather than excitement. The SD1 threw all of that away. It arrived with a hatchback body, a fastback roofline, and a smooth, aerodynamic silhouette that looked more like a premium European GT car than a British family saloon. The single large rear hatch was particularly striking, almost nobody was doing this in the family car segment at this price point. Business owners who pulled up in one instantly looked forward-thinking, sophisticated, and modern. This didn't feel like a car from the 1970s, it felt like what every sensible family car would eventually become. But the next car wasn't interested in being sensible at all. Number 3. Lotus Espri. When the Lotus Espri appeared in 1976, it immediately looked like nothing else that existed in British motoring. Designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro, the Esprit wore an angular, geometric wedge shape with flat panels, sharp creases, and a mid-engined layout that gave it a completely flat rear deck and an impossibly low nose. It was a car made of straight lines at a time when most cars still relied on gentle curves, and that geometric precision gave it an almost architectural quality, like something designed by a mathematician rather than a traditional car designer. Parked next to any other British car of the period, it looked like it had been transported in from a decade in the future and left on the pavement by mistake. Seeing one in person reportedly made people genuinely speechless. It was that different, that complete, that stunning. This didn't feel like a car from the 1970s, it felt like the definitive shape of things to come. But only two cars stand between us and the most futuristic British car of the entire decade. Number 2. Lotus Elite Series 2. The Lotus Elite of 1974 was a car that quietly redefined what a grand touring car could look like. While the Esprit grabbed headlines with its sharp aggression, the Elite arrived with something more sophisticated, a long, smooth, aerodynamic body with a glass hatchback, deeply reclined seating, and an interior layout that genuinely felt ahead of its time. The roofline sloped gracefully all the way to the tail, giving the car a fluid, almost organic silhouette that felt far more contemporary than anything in its class. Climb inside and the sensation was of a car designed around the driver, low, wide, with instruments positioned logically and a feeling of space that defied the car's compact exterior. People who drove the Elite in 1974 often described feeling like they were experiencing something that didn't belong to that moment in time. This didn't feel like a car from the 1970s, it felt like a beautiful promise about where luxury would eventually go. And now, the moment you've been waiting for. The #1 British car that looked the most futuristic in the 1970s. And once you see it, you'll understand immediately why nothing else could possibly take this spot. Number 1. Aston Martin Lagonda Series 2. This wasn't just ahead of its time. This felt like it belonged in a completely different era, one that hadn't arrived yet and, by some extraordinary engineering miracle, had sent a car back to announce itself. The Aston Martin Lagonda Series 2, unveiled in 1976, was an experience that stopped people completely still. The exterior alone was enough to cause that reaction, a long, impossibly low wedge shape with a near-flat bonnet, sharp angular lines, and a profile so extreme that it looked less like a luxury saloon and more like a spaceship that had politely agreed to use for wheels. William Townes designed it with geometric precision that felt almost violent in its modernity. Every surface was flat, every angle was deliberate, and every line communicated speed, technology, and controlled aggression. But the exterior was only the beginning. Step inside the Lagonda and you entered something that felt genuinely science-fictional. The instrument cluster used early digital displays and touch-sensitive controls, technology so advanced that even Aston Martin's engineers struggled to make it work reliably. In 1976, most cars still had analog dials and simple switches. The Lagonda had a dashboard that looked like a mission control console. People who sat inside it for the first time often described feeling as though they had misunderstood what cars were supposed to be. On the road, the Lagonda didn't just look futuristic, it felt futuristic. The long, low body cut through the air with an authority that made everything around it seem temporary and old-fashioned. Pull up at traffic lights next to a standard British saloon and the contrast was almost comical. One car belonged to 1976. The other appeared to belong to somewhere around 2001. Even today, photographs of the original Lagonda Series 2 can be mistaken for concept cars, designs produced purely to show an idea, never intended for actual production. But Aston Martin built it. They put it on the road. They charged people extraordinary sums of money for it, and people paid, because nothing else offered this. Nothing else even came close. This wasn't just a car from the 1970s that looked futuristic. This was the future, briefly and unexpectedly made real. And there you have it, 10 British cars that didn't just reflect the decade they were born in, but looked far beyond it. What's remarkable is how many of these designs predicted exactly where the automotive world was eventually heading, towards aerodynamics, digital technology, practical sportiness, and bold, confident styling that prioritized the future over the familiar. These cars were built by people who refused to accept that today's answer was good enough, and the roads of 1970s Britain were richer and stranger for it. So tell us in the comments, which car surprised you the most? And if you enjoy discovering the remarkable, forgotten, and futuristic side of British history, make sure you check out our other videos. We think you'll enjoy what's coming next. Until next time.